afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. As we look to wrap up a really productive conference, want to dig into this panel and describe a little bit of how I have felt both in our own conversation, getting ready for this, and at this conference more generally. And it's confusion. So parenthetically, I think the point of this conference in some ways is to come and sort of soak up all the innovation and figure out what's happening and where, and then we all go home mostly exhausted and try to make sense of it from there. And I think this panel in some ways is not really all that different. We started out thinking that this panel was going to be about what are the emerging technologies that are helping people understand the skills in the market and how companies are treating that and handling that to be innovative. And on one hand, it absolutely is. There's a ton of really interesting stuff that's happening at Burning Glass where I work. We are tracking real-time demand for 20,000 skills, looking at how they're going to grow or shrink in the future and treating the questions of career success and firm success as a big data problem. Susan will tell you more about how she's taking some of the data that we've developed and making that real across her organization, just to give you a sense of the scale that she's working at, and this is a really important part of her work. Accenture has 440,000 employees?
442.
Okay, so if you made Accenture its own city, it would be the 45th largest city in the country between Oakland and Omaha.
Good stuff.
Wikipedia. And Armen takes a similar big data, AI-driven lens and applies a very different problem, right? It's not just about skills. How do we think about employee behavior? How do we think about engagement? Skills without engagement are not very helpful. Engagement without skills, I guess, is probably also not very helpful. And Suzanne is from Devonshire, and so is looking incredibly deeply at what's happening within the firms that she's partnering with to think about how are they addressing their questions of skills and talent. So that part of it totally is what we said it was. This is about what are emerging technologies to inform skills. But as we start talking, I think what you'll see is that the conversation is really about a set of bigger questions and the organization of work. What's the role of HR? What does that mean for hiring managers? What information is important? And I'm a little bit worried that the answer is going to be all of it. And it also can't be that answer because that's not a fair ask of hiring managers. So how do we think about that? And then there's a sort of existential question that I think 4 o'clock on a Wednesday is a perfect time to ponder, which is what is a skill and how do we define it? And so I don't think we'll get to resolution on all those questions. But I'm incredibly excited about the group of folks who we've assembled here. And so I'm going to let them introduce their work with a series of questions, and then we will start the conversation from there. So first, Susan, if you could just talk a little bit about what you've been doing at Accenture. I think this is a really powerful case study in how to think about the role of skills in a large organization and how do we make granular decisions at scale.
Sure. So first, I want everyone to think about the last time you bought the latest thing because, the last thing you bought the latest thing because you simply just had to have it. So whether it was a new phone, like the new iPhone, whether it was a new smart speaker, or maybe a fidget spinner for your kid. I know I did that. Did you get it because it was cool? Maybe it made your life infinitely better. In the end, you got it because you were responding to trends. So what if we could predict those trends? Would you have bought it sooner? What if we could use technology to predict trends so that we know what skills we need for the future? So within Accenture, I'm here to tell you that we do have a way to do that, and it's really powerful because when you can predict the future, you can start to train or hire for those skills right now. So as Dan mentioned, at Accenture, we're a global professional services company with more than 440,000 employees. We hire 100,000 employees every year, which is a big number. And we need to make sure that our people have the right skills so that they're relevant now and in the future. So we started on a journey because about 5 years ago, we missed an important opportunity. There was a new technology that was growing, and it was growing fast, and we didn't have enough people with the skills to keep up. We didn't see the growth because we weren't looking for it. So in order to not miss the next big thing, we turned to data and analytics. So now we identify skills that are emerging in the market by looking at patterns in the data. Which skills are growing fast, which skills are growing faster than predicted, which skills are becoming less relevant, and then we act on it by adjusting our training or our hiring plans so we can keep pace. As we think of some of the lessons we learned along the way, because any journey has good lessons, I've got 3 key ones I wanted to share. The first is internal data is not enough. This is how I met Dan. We started looking at, we did some work with MIT to start to identify skills from our internal data, but we were missing what was going on in the market. So we partnered with Burning Glass to be able to get that market data. And it's when the two are combined that our insights are infinitely more powerful. The second thing we learned is that it has to be actionable. There's no David Letterman top 10 list of skills for the future, as far as I'm concerned, because if a company is going to invest in a skill, the skill has to be relevant to them. And to be relevant, you need to get to some level of specificity that's actionable. Not all security skills are, there's many security skills. There's a whole set of skills for cybersecurity versus information security. And when you get to that level of detail, you can actually take action. Our third learning is that you have to trust the insights. For this to work, you have to trust the insights, and that requires a change in mindset. There's too many skills out there for a person to know at a time when the pace of change is so rapid that you have to use data and analytics. We have one example of working with our security business where we were able to use the insights to basically inform them that the skill that they were planning to invest in was actually predicted to decline. And on the other hand, we were able to tell them, here's the skill that's predicted to grow, so you can start pivoting people to that skill and do it now. So if we go back to that skill that we missed about 5 years ago, if we knew then what we know now, we could have started building that skill 2 years before we did.
Thanks. So, Armen, Susan's thinking about how do I hire 100,000 people a year. That is not a human-scaled problem in any way. You are thinking about hiring from a really important and much more human-scaled question. And so I'd love for you to talk about the ways that you are applying similar-sized data sets to help make and understand questions of individual employee engagement.
Sure. First of all, thanks everyone for coming. You guys are family, as far as I'm concerned, the 4 o'clock session. So I'm Armen Berjikly. I work on leading strategy at Ultimate Software. We're 1% your size, which is amazing, 4,000 people. And I was 0.01% your size. I ran a startup called Kanjoya that was acquired by Ultimate. And what we worked on at Kanjoya was this idea of workforce intelligence, incorporating the qualitative side of things. Right, so my sort of very passionate personal belief is that technology lacks empathy, but needs it, because technology's entire purpose is to enable people. It works with people, it interfaces with people, yet it always has left off the entire aspect of essentially our qualitative side, our feelings, our intentions, our behaviors, et cetera. And so we did, over time, and now we're doing at scale, is bring that set of techniques to bear, that when we look at things like unstructured data with the machine, we're able to pull out things like emotions, and not kind of the polarity of happy and sad, but actually sort of the actual tapestry of human emotion, like worry, anxious, excited, joyous, and couple that with also, no matter how the person's talking, what language they're talking, what vernacular, where they were born, what gender, what age, what generation, we can still sort of figure out the thematics of what they're speaking about too. So sort of those two skill sets, emotion and topic, being applied to unstructured data, gave us a different worldview that I'd like to believe is a much more sort of human-oriented, people-first type approach to things. And in the world of human resources, what we can do is we can kind of look at all the different arenas where we're making decisions. You can say today it's based off judgment. And if we're all honest with ourselves, judgment today predominantly involves gut feel. Right? This feels like the right decision, it's inertia, we've always done it this way, like history, or horribly unconscious bias of I just liked the way this went and therefore I'm gonna hire this person. So what we like to do is bring some evidence base into manager judgment that accommodates that whole side of the brain, the left side of the brain, that has been not necessarily ignored because of sort of malicious intent, but it's just very, very hard to get technology to be sensitive to these types of skills. So when we look at challenges like hiring, you bring to bear some of the qualitative components. Culture is not necessarily just a byproduct of salary and tenure and salary history, for example. It has some other aspects to it. Amazon and Tesla are very different work environments than Walmart and Costco. And so this complement to the world is what we'd like to work on, and we're perpetuating with my work at Ultimate.
Fantastic. So Suzanne, Susan and Armen both described their work sort of coming out of, here's a big problem, right? For Accenture, it was, we didn't have the skills we need, we weren't tracking the skills we needed, and so we swung and missed. For Armen, right, it's a set of questions around culture and bias, and right, there's 4 more panels to do on that one. And so as you are looking at the market, what are you seeing as where companies are getting stuck in their inertia, and what are the drivers that you are seeing of when companies are able to break free and break out and execute on some of the kinds of bleeding edge practices that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of companies doing a lot of innovative things, and there's a lot of opportunity to leverage data in organizations. But I think most large organizations, and most organizations that have been around for a long time, really are struggling with, how do I leverage this data? How do I take advantage of it? Because the new kind of world of working, a world where people are constantly upskilling and reskilling, where you're trying to make your organization more mobile, almost runs in the face of the way that organizations have been built historically. So legacy organizations have pretty hierarchical structures. They tend to have silos, and you have to start to change all of that when you start to use the data in here. So you've got a world that works with job descriptions and kind of hierarchical promotions. It's not about skills. When you're talking about skills, it's kind of breaking that down into what are the core skills and how do I make and form teams and make my organization more nimble. And I see a lot of companies getting stuck with just the whole broader cultural change. How do I enable mobility? How do I define skills? How do I even understand what skills my organization needs? How do I know what skills my employees have? How do I know what my employees want to do? How do I put learning in place to try to build their skills from one place to another? So I look, some of the work that Susan's doing, her company's, much more advanced than that, and some of that's a factor of scale and the use of leveraging data. But a lot of traditional organizations are still struggling with this, and I think there's a lot of innovative solutions out there, but organizations are wrestling with, how do I plug that in? Where do I start when at the end of the day I got a fundamental cultural shift that I need to make in my organization?
Dig in more on the question of where to start. And actually, each of the 4 of us did a thing that actually makes this conversation not work, which is that we've taken the company and described it as a person. And a company is not a person, right? A company is a collection of people with their own set of incentives and motivations and expertise and biases. And so if we're going to get to a place where we are using data, we are being thoughtful about skills, we are understanding biases, we are hiring better, we are training better, all the things that we are talking about here, we can't say the company as though it will magically grow like a tree in the sidewalk. Who is it who drives that change, and how do we think about starting with a specific person?
That's a really good question, because I think it varies. Part of driving the change, I think, is having the type of culture that allows you to try new things, right? I was in consulting for about 11 years and then moved into internal HR, and the reason why I did it is because within Accenture and internally, we have the appetite to try new things. I didn't feel like was doing all the coolest things when I was in my consulting world. So the reason why I say that is because you need to have that kind of environment or culture where people can try it, where you can say, what if we did this? And for me, that means in HR, we're bringing those innovations, frankly, to our consulting folks. But I think it needs to partly be bred by having the kind of leadership where they get out of the way of people who want to try and experiment and solve problems in innovative ways. I don't know if you guys.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think it needs to start with leadership, but it doesn't have. It can be leadership somewhere in the organization who's got enough control over that you can have that freedom to experiment. I can give you an example from. We're affiliated with Fidelity, so I can give you an example where we had an associate in a call center raised his hand. This is a couple years ago. Said, I really want to get into technology. I have no idea how to get into technology. People in manager doesn't know how to get that person into technology because they work in the call center. Also, they don't know anybody in the technology group. But we have an innovation group. Fidelity has an innovation group. They said, well, let's start to wrestle with this question. How can we bridge the skills gap? How can we upskill this individual? Technology group is having its own problems. We can't recruit enough mainframe developers. I know that's an old skill, but if you're a long-established company, there still are needs for mainframe developers. No colleges are graduating them, so it's not so easy to find. And so they really start to look, let's see if we can find a way to take a call center employee and turn them into a mainframe developer, solve a problem for the technology organization, solve a problem there. And so a group of people willing to experiment, organization has a couple of needs that they're trying to solve, and put a program in place that could do that. Put instead of pre-work, let's make sure that this is what this person really wants to do. About 15 to 20 hours of pre-work that a person had to go through to say, hey, I want to go through the application process. 6 people selected, put them through a boot camp. Company has 6 more mainframe developers. Then you take that and you figure out how can you scale it. So now the company has run the program for software engineers. Now it's opened up for any non-technical person to apply who wants to get into the technology organization. But it all started with, an associate in 2016 raising their hand and saying, hey, how do I get into technology? And a manager that was willing to say, hey, let's go explore this, and an innovation group that was willing to say, let's put something into place. And it's a step, it doesn't solve the whole thing, but it can start from anywhere, and then it builds from there.
Yeah, I would love to add to that. I think the area that I would represent is that in the end we also need the buy-in of the individual employees, right? Like we have to make it cool and exciting for them to participate in something like this. Skills is usually a situation where if you have the resume, it's dated. It was sort of a jilted way of representing it, so we don't have an accurate or current skills base. We can't ask people to go and fill them in unless they're motivated to do it. So in a world, for example, that I would hint at that we could do with more of the natural language processing is you could go out to your employees once a year, just say in your own words, what are you good at? What do you wish you were better at? What do you never want to do, right? Now you kind of brought it back to my idea of technology having empathy. You brought it into where we are as people and finally saying, it's 2018 and beyond. Technology should just understand us as we are, and particularly with generations that are coming up that are used to communicating the way they want to, at the time they want to, and getting an instant reaction and result from it. We have to sort of adapt. So I would just complement what's being said with the idea that if we could incorporate grounds up in lots of different clever ways, gamification being one of them, that makes all of this go round because then we can get the data that can lead to the outcomes that we really are looking for.
How close are you to building that?
I'd love to just say done, meet me outside. A lot of that has been done. I've spent 15 years of my professional career working on exactly these types of capabilities. And so I hinted at the fact that emotions and thematics are sort of the 2 building blocks that we've worked on, and it better than human accuracy. So we are really, really far in some areas, but I would always caution AI is at the very beginnings of its journey, and anyone that pretends that it's all figured out is lying or incompetent or a hopeless optimist. And I'm, somewhere hopefully more evolved than that, where I just go, there's a lot of opportunities that it opens up. It's a journey together with end users who want to help imagine their future, bring it back to the technologists and help them do that mapping because it's really, really still early days.
I agree that it's a journey together. I think one of the challenges that enterprises have, and I'm going to say the company, but I'll come back and get it down to something more focused, is you need to have somebody in the organization who can benefit from that data and use that data and knows what to do with that data. And in a lot of legacy organizations, the HR team is not that comfortable with data. That's not the way that HR organizations grew up. A lot of people in these organizations haven't grown up that way, aren't fluent in data. So I think one place to start is to start building that skill set into human resources departments. Get everybody in the department at least some level of fluency with data. Get some people in there that have some real specialist knowledge about data, and don't make them a junior level analyst. Make it somebody who's got some power and some significance in the organization, because then you can start to benefit from the kind of skills data that Susan's bringing in, or the kind of data that.
But I do think there's different types of people that you need. So
Sure.
you need the people who need to know more of the data science and know like what to do with the data. What's the hypothesis that we're trying to test so that we can figure out what we're going to do with it. Then there's a whole other piece, which is what I'm working with right now, which is how do we enable the people in HR to actually use the data, generate the insights, to be able to almost advise the business. Because I don't need everybody to be the data scientist,
No.
right? But I also can't hand over a dashboard to say, here's all the trends, go do something with it, without them understanding. Because they say, this is great, what do I do with it? And now we're trying to create practitioners to be able to interpret it, figure out what to do with it, and then advise the business. So, and what we're hearing from them is this is really changing the conversation and giving them the seat at the table, because they're enabled with the data to help drive the conversation in a different way.
Yeah.
And so there's definite variations, but I absolutely agree. Like, we all need to be more fluent in the data and insights. And
So, talked a bunch about where to start. You're pushing us farther. If we jump ahead, right? So let's go forward some number of years. The kind of work that we're talking about here has reached a stage of maturity. And now we take our company's org charts and job descriptions, and we erase them. And so now we are reimagining the HR function. Where does it fit on the org chart? And what is the role? How is it different than today?
with what I just said around HR being advisors, I think the role of HR is definitely more in the strategic space versus the operational. And I'm not just talking about jobs being automated, but I think there's a place for HR to be more in the strategic space. And to be strategic, you need to have that data element to what you're doing so that we're making more data-driven decisions. And bringing in all of your good stuff, though, so we're not just doing everything based on data. Where does it sit in? I can't answer your question yet. I have to think about where it sits in the org chart.
I think my question is, what does the org chart of the future
Right.
even look like? You know, it kind of, that question in itself kind of indicates that there may be some, like there's some type of hierarchy. I'm sure there is some type of org chart of the future, but I think HR is a strategic player at the table, involved in the decisions of the business, because if you know where the business wants to go and you can figure out what skills the business is going to need to get there, you know, HR is a counselor or advisor to help you figure out, how do I get the people that enable you to make that happen? How do I help set those people up to be successful?
So I mean, what I would add to that is, I mean, I've never run across a company that has the properly resourced HR team, right? Like everyone's always under-resourced. And if we're honest with ourselves, HR happens a lot at the frontline manager, right? Like the sort of most poorly trained manager there is in a company is that engineer that was good at engineering and was promoted to a manager of engineers. So for me, what I'd bring to bear in this one is how much can we democratize intelligence? You know, everyone has to make decisions, CEO has to make decisions, but that frontline manager has to make decisions. And, you know, not to be dramatic, but they're life or death for whoever they're hiring, whoever they're firing. So could we get away from them using whatever rubric they bring to the game, which is based on their experience, their biases, their shortness of time, and give them the type of intelligence that an Accenture consulting agreement would have provided them? How much can we burden product and technology and solutions to just forward some more and more intelligence? And again, that's why this is a journey. There's a bit of a pie-in-the-sky outcome at the end, but for me, that's how I look at it, is that sort of atomic unit of the company is going to be that frontline manager. How can I unburden the traditional 5-person HR team to be able to get as much intelligence at those end nodes as possible? And I think it's a really sort of worthy goal to go for.
So,
I think sorry, Dan, I think there's something really powerful in that, because the way we've typically answered that is we have leaner HR, and so we're going to make so many things self-service for our people. Right. And you end up, the experience for our people is terrible, right? So how do you do that? You can make some things self-service, but how do you enable them with the insight so that they can drive their personalized learning experience or whatever it is? It can be self-service, but it has to be the right things, right? It's when those things that are tactical, like we can't go that far. We have to bring what you're suggesting, which I totally agree with, but do it in such a way that you're really enabling your people, and that's going to give them that sense of ownership and that personalized experience.
And confidence.
Totally, yeah.
I love that.
where do we see examples of this happening? right? I mean, this is sort of describing a really, I think, powerful and important vision that if we aren't going to push past the frontline manager level, because they will always be crummy at HR, and they will always be doing some hiring and some managing. And so really the question to push on is, how do we enable individuals to chart their own course through an organization so that they don't promote themselves out of a company when they're looking for a raise, so that they understand, if I want to make a lateral shift within the firm, what do I need to do in order to do that? Do you have any examples?
I'm going to bet Armen has great examples there.
Okay.
But I'm going to start by saying that one of our challenges that we have at Accenture right now is our culture prevents that. Because we have what I call is a culture of ownership. Because we have this culture that says, I'm your lead, I own you, you can't go over there, I own you, right? Which means people do say it's easier to find your next job outside of Accenture than it is within. And so we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we open that up? When you have 400,000 people, there's a lot of opportunities out there, right? So I think a lot of it has to start with the right culture of being able to, it's like your tour of duty concept that we've been hearing about for years as well. How do we have this culture that encourages people to find that next opportunity? And maybe that's outside of the company, but maybe the experience is so great that they end up coming back. And right now, my company misses that. We don't get it right, but we need to.
I think one of the things that's important for companies to put in place is just a kind of a common definition of skills that's used across the organization. So in a lot of large corporations, you have companies that have come together in different ways over time, and there might be different systems supporting different things. You could have different skills definitions in different parts of the organization. So how do you put a common platform in place that talks about skills? Because if you want to really enable mobility across the organization, the first thing you have to be able to align on is what is this skill? Does this skill over here mean the same thing as the skill over here? So you don't have the disconnects there. So how do you put that in place? And then how do you put a learning system in place? And I think this might be the more solvable piece. So how do you put a learning system in place that can help people realize those skills and help people achieve those skills?
Yeah, I mean, this is really exciting because it's like a tip of a spear type question, right? Like, you can't do data science without the data. And most of data science is like data cleaning, right? So you have garbage data and trying to make it slightly better. So I think that we've talked a little bit about here, like the fundamental data that you need to do this sort of career movement is either missing or abjectly bad or whatever. So one problem is that. The other is like the shift. If you look at human capital management solutions, succession management is what it's called, right? Like this product, right? And yet what we're not talking about is like, I'm leaving, so come behind me. This is more like transition management, right? And all the studies around the fluid workplace and gig economy and like sort of everything's going to become all over the place. You really do need to pioneer something where a person can say, rather than going outside my company, maybe there's opportunities I don't even know about in my company. And so there's a way that I can easily locate those without looking for, let's say, salary or location or some obvious ones. So I think it's a really important area to innovate in. I think it's going to be a differentiator for whoever can come forward with it. And it's going to definitely capitalize on both human intelligence as well as whatever technology you can bring to the equation to make sort of both the employee and the manager work together.
So as we're working through this conversation, right? So phase one was, we've got to have the data to set up good decisions. Phase two is we need to put that data in the hands of the right people to make those decisions. Some of that is hiring managers. More of that are individual workers. Right? We all make lots of decisions about our own careers far more often than our bosses do. I think the third piece is around assessment, right? Because ultimately, I can be the Fidelity call center rep who wants to be a mainframe developer, but in order for me to be a mainframe developer, like, I've got to know something about COBOL.
Right.
And you don't want me in your mainframe if I don't know anything about COBOL, because I might break the whole bank. And that's bad for everybody. And so how do we think about assessment at scale? And I'm struck by the point you raised, Susan, around how much time it takes to do assessment at Accenture, so you've got a particular view of the problem that I'd love for you to share, but I think for the group, like, where are we there? Like, do we have assessments that make sense, and how do we think about it?
So in one part of our business, it costs our company 100,000 productive hours every year for people to take skill assessments. That's 50 years of time. We can't keep doing that. The other parts of our business, we rely on people who self-report on skills, which is highly subjective. And people don't even go in and update their skills anyway. So we don't trust it. So we don't have a good sense of what skills our people have. I'll give you a little bit of a teaser. One thing that I'm working on right now is how do we bring in data and analytics to be able to measure our skills for our people so that we can do away with assessments. For Accenture, that is the only way for us to go because of our scale. And we actually are working on that to be able to implement later this year, which is amazing for me personally, because this has been my baby for 3 years. But the idea is that we are coming at it from an approach that says, let's look objectively, let's be data-driven, so that we can understand what skills our people have. And then you get such powerful insights when you know what you've measured, and you could see, where do I have the gaps? We need to grow blockchain, and we can actually, we think we don't have enough blockchain skills, but we can actually have the data prove it out, or where does it sit? So for us, the only way for us to go is data and analytics, because otherwise there's no way to do it at scale.
I'm going to use a specific example because I think it's a pretty big question in the engineering world, right? Which is assessment is really hard, right? You could make an engineer go on the whiteboard, sort of in that prototypical Silicon Valley test, but that actually is totally biased against women. There's like studies about how that isn't even a fair representation. There's a company called Code Fights, a disclaimer, I invested in it. So, but what they're doing, and I think it's novel, is they basically train up, like there's a lot of standard problems in computer science, like sorting or whatever. They train up the algorithm based on a given company's engineers. So they have like the good engineers take it, and how do they solve the problem or whatever. And then that assessment, either externally to hire new people or internally to move people into transitions, is given. It's sort of at your own time. It's with a computer screen, right? It has its own problems, right, in terms of biases, but it removes some of the human biases. And I think it's a creative solution to a problem that is otherwise an infinite time suck and highly variable on the individual administering the assessment and the environment of the assessment. So I think you're going to start to see some sort of verticalized solutions because that is a very real problem and the numbers are staggering. And it's also highly biased in the current implementation.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult problem, and I don't think the solutions are out there yet. And I think it'll come and evolve over time. I think it's going to be a journey for organizations, you know, and it may start with peer review, as flawed as I think peer review is, and I do think it's flawed. Your manager doesn't necessarily skilled in the thing that they're reviewing. So there's a whole bunch of issues there. It's going to take forms of 360 things that we've known for years, 360-degree feedback, and that for leadership and team management. It's going to take some of these technologies on the like Code Fights and things on the coding front, and they're all imperfect. And I think over time the solutions will get better, but I think that's still an area where 5 years from now, I hope there's a lot better solutions out there than there are today.
What about soft skills? All of our examples were technical skills. Our soft skills, are they accessible? And if so, how do we do it?
Yes, I think they're
I'm just throwing out hard questions.
it's kind of weird, right? It's sort of an irony, which is like you have this cold thing called AI, which we imagine to be the Terminator and HAL and all this stuff. But in some ways, that might restore the humanity of it all, because right now we have to evaluate people. We turn them into a number, and we base that number on completely quantitative things, like this is your tenure, this is your background, this is the school you went to, blah, blah, blah. And so, yes, there absolutely are technologies I've been talking about are ones that could say, all right, like based on the performance reviews from your peers, from your manager, from your reports, sort of what are the thematics that you're praised for? Like maybe it's your timeliness, maybe it's your enthusiasm, whatever have you. That can actually be pulled out of performance data today if you apply the right X-ray machine, right? And I think that is a first step in bringing evidence-based assessments and improvements to the qualitative side of things, which dramatically affect us, right? Like Google and Facebook still lose people despite their pay and despite massages and all that stuff. So there's a huge part of fit and engagement and all that's due to the irrationality, the emotion of people. So I don't think have a chance in hell of solving these problems the right way unless we accommodate that qualitative side. And I think the tools are starting to become at least speaking the right language about this is an important thing to go for.
And so as we think about questions of hiring and promotion, right, how do we articulate the right balance between technical skills, and I hate calling them soft skills because they're not soft, but if you have a better word, Armen, I'll take it. No, this is appropriate. This is the naming dilemma.
We call them professional skills.
There you go.
Yeah.
How do we think about getting the balance right in terms of how we, right? Because we actually don't assess people as skills. We assess people as people, and I either need you in the job or not, and I can't have some of your skills and not others. And so how do we think about getting that balance right and what that means for this future HR organization that we are attempting to define?
I think it's interesting because there's a lot of the recruiting panels and discussions that I've been part of or participating in this last few days. And it's interesting when you think of recruiting trying to be as automated as possible. Like what can we do to match people to opportunities, right? But at the end of the day, you need to get to that human element because the candidate is evaluating you as a company, but also you as an individual, as a representative of that company. Do I want to work for you? If you're the type of person, and I think you're a terrible interviewer, well, maybe you represent everybody at your company, and I don't want to work there, right? You have to have that interaction. And I think it's not a great answer to your question, but I think it has to come through that human element that still has to be part of recruiting, and we can't ignore it. Things like storytelling are critical for us. But you can't evaluate that using data. You can't evaluate that using a robot. You actually have to assess somebody's ability to, how good of a communicator are they, and can they tell a story?
I agree with what Susan's saying. I would almost argue that those skills are going to become more important in the future than they are right now, because as robots and technology replaces a lot of these automated jobs, it's going to be the ones that involve people that are going to be the ones that are going to stay there. And how do you make sure people have those skills? I think you're going to have a person involved in that piece of it. And I think it's the organizations that keep that and build on that and invest in that are going to be ones that are going to be more successful.
One thing we've seen on that, looking at our data, is a lot about sort of hybridization of work, and so combining skill sets that haven't traditionally lived together. So one hybrid skill we've been tracking is communicating data. So external demand for it has increased 323% in the last couple of years, right? And so as we enter a data-rich world, sort of simply turning on the fire hose and blasting it at people is not actually a way to help get decisions made from that data. And so the ability to take a data set, synthesize it, and take action from it, right? That's the core theme of this conversation. We're seeing that bear out in the market.
Even with our solution, which is really a dashboard, right? We call it the Next Horizon Skills Dashboard. It's a whole bunch of data, right? I could give that to somebody and say, here, and they'll be like, what do I do with this? How do I know what's relevant? That, to me, my earlier point on what's relevant comes in there, because there could be 5 skills that are all doing the same thing in a certain space, but you as a leader needs to understand, well, I'm going to invest in this one, not these other 4. Just because there's 5 skills out there that are trending doesn't mean you're going to invest in all 5. So you need some human element there to bring in the relevancy, and where are you going to hang your hat?
I think the other challenge that'll happen with the skills is you can predict the skills. That doesn't mean that the person's there who can train people in those skills.
Right.
So, there's kind of follow-on challenges that are going to come from this as well.
And it's only going to come faster.
Right.
So let me ask one last question and then give each of you a chance to think about it. And I think sort of with that idea that this is going to come faster, and lots of this is hard. Two-part question. First part is, what is something that you're optimistic about? And then the second part is, what is the advice that you have for a CHRO or a CEO in the room around how to think about the future of skills and what that means for organizational success.
I would say, I mean, one of the things that makes me optimistic is the nature of the conversations that are happening. You know, I think we're in a place now where people see these trends coming. People are seeing that how organizations need to change. People are starting to experiment in a way that they weren't before. So I really see this shift really on the cusp of happening, and I think a lot of companies 5 years from now will look a lot different than they do today, but I'm really encouraged by the type of conversations there. And I think it can be really enabling when done right for the employees in the organizations. So if you look at the Gallup data, 35% of employees are engaged in their jobs. Well, if this is done right, that number could be quite a bit higher, and I think that's really something to be optimistic about. Advice I'd give to HR organizations is get started. You know, even if you don't have it all figured out, if you're saddled with a legacy HRIS system or a legacy LMS system, you got all kinds of things stacked against you. Find places to experiment. Put a learning system in there. Don't even pay attention to just get people learning. You know, as a starting point, do what you can to get it going, because it'll get you started down the road.
Okay, I'll go because in order. Optimism, I'm going to be a little weird about this one. I thought last week's Facebook hearings have lifted the fog of confusion a little bit on people wake up to the fact that their data is being collected and stuff's happening with their data. As a data scientist myself, as someone who really hopes that it's going to play a big role in the future, I actually want the active participation of the end employee. I don't want to be doing stuff behind their back or in the mystery where they're like, wait a minute, I had no idea that that was what was going on. So that's actually giving me a glimmer, minus the cynicism of like, are we ever going to do anything with Facebook and all that? But like, I do want to say that I think that conversation's starting and people being maybe totally fine with it in the end. And that's actually the case. Like Facebook hasn't even had a blip in usage based off all this chaos, but people at least will say like, yeah, I get it, I'm the product, et cetera. So I think that makes me a little more confident that people are aware of what's going on. If I had to give advice to CHROs, I think the themes already just laid out by my peers here. Storytelling really matters. This idea, you had talked about it previously in the call, the trope that we want our seat at the table. Like that expectation shouldn't even be talked about anymore, right? Like we have the most important assets of an organization. The VIP customers are the employees. There's tons of data about them. There's plenty of tools that will give you data. So that really now it's inherent upon us to be able to tell stories with that data and make sure that they kind of bubble both from the ground up as well as the top down. And when you're looking for skill sets, like economists actually have really good skill sets to tell stories from data. Not everyone's had the luxury of hiring people, but I think that mindset that there's some sort of atypical roles that could come into an HR function and tell a really good story of what the data really means at the end user is really interesting to me, and I've seen some great success in organizations being able to use that concept for strategic differentiation.
So I'm going to start with the second. My advice is to really look at things in an integrated fashion. So today, especially in a company as large as Accenture, we are so siloed in our thinking, and it causes us to say, we don't have somebody with these skills, go hire for them. But what we should be doing is looking and seeing, what should we really be doing? Who should we be training on those skills now in our workforce? Those skills may not even exist in the market, or there may not be enough people if you think of the marketplace. So how can we be much more integrated in the way that we think of building our talent internally, as well as who do we hire, as well as maybe you've got contractors or agile workforce coming in, but we have to be very integrated and break down the silos. And my optimism there is I do think that we are doing more of that. And when you do bring the data in, you really start to see all of the use cases, and you get to the art of the possible. When you have data in one area, you can see how it can feed into, oh, this can impact this area, recruiting and compensation and all of that. And I think you have to be open to looking at everything in a much more holistic fashion, and the data and the insights can really drive a much more holistic business.
Thank you. I'm feeling really generally inspired by this conversation, and so on that note, I thank the panelists for joining and spending their time here, and really sort of want to double down on I think a couple of the big themes that are coming through, and it's this sense of if we're going to push skills forward. It's a complicated, messy arena. And so then the question is, how do we track the data and how do we tell stories around it? And so I think let's end here and think about this question of how do we go back and how do we tell stories about skills and how do we tell stories about advancement. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.